Hello friends. For today's video, I am doing what is kind of like a part 2 to a video that I did recently. That other video was a list of books that among the fantasy circles that I'm a part of, it seems as though everyone loves these, they gush about them, they have really high average ratings, and they just have really, really passionate fan bases. And I didn't hate them by any means, but I also didn't really think they were all that exceptional for me personally. They just didn't really connect, and so I called that somewhat unpopular opinions. Everyone loves these, but I think they're just fine. And I wanted to do the same thing in reverse, where I talk about books that it seems like everybody really, really hates or thinks are absolute garbage and they're trash, and why does anybody like these? And I was like, I thought they were all right. So I'm going to just jump right into it. I do have the average ratings for all of these, and there are a couple that are higher as a result of, one, some of these are just exceptionally popular, and two, some of these are obviously loved by people. Not literally everyone hates these, but in the circles that I am a part of online, I often see people mock these books, make fun of them, and hate them. So I'm going to include some of those. The first one that I'm starting with, it has of the ones on this list, pretty high average rating. It's exactly 4.0 when I checked. But, oh my gosh, it feels like everybody makes videos about how this is just the worst book. It's so bad. It's just absolutely, you get it. You get the idea. I don't need to keep repeating myself. And that book would be Carval by Stephanie Garber. So this is a very interesting story that follows this traveling performance. And it's very magical and whimsical, and our two main characters decide that, well, one of the main characters really wants to be a part of this, and the other one's like, no, we should just, not. And they both get wrapped up in it, otherwise there would be no plot to the story. They get wrapped up in this performance, and a lot of it is very much a question of, is this actually happening? When people get hurt, are they actually hurt, or are those the performers? Am I a performer? This feels real to me, and it's very much a mystery, and there's weird things that happen, and there's bizarre magic that's occurring. It's very fairy tale-esque and nonsensical and whimsical. And I read the whole trilogy. I thought they were fine. I didn't love them. I do see a lot of people really zero in on how over the top the writing itself is. The analogies, the metaphors, the similes are really frequent. And some of them are nonsensical, and some of them feel like if you were to, when you actually make comparisons, and I definitely make a lot of bad comparisons all the time, cheesy ones or not very good comparisons, but these ones are ones where if you literally are like, it was as if or it was like, and you actually compare the two, you're like, how are these things like? This doesn't make any sense. If you look at it literally, I am not one of those people that looks at metaphors and similes really literally when I'm reading. I think sometimes it's for the effect, is to have something pretty and fluffy and purple in there. And I think someone like Laini Taylor is better, in my opinion, at it. I think Laini Taylor's, I think they do a better job evoking that imagery, whereas in this, it feels a little bit lighter, and I keep using the term nonsensical, but it feels more nonsensical. And it didn't bug me. I can absolutely see it bugging other people, and I can absolutely see people being like, but that's not a thing, though. How would you know what that's like? How would you know what that tastes like? What do you mean it felt blue? What does that even mean? Which, ironically, that might be more of a Laini Taylor thing. But either way, the writing is, it's a lot. It's a lot. It's almost as if there's like a hint of edginess to it, but almost like cotton candy edginess. Now I'm doing it. Clearly the book is rubbing off on me, because that didn't make any sense either. I don't know how to explain it, but it's silly. And the plot is all over the place. It is all over the place. And I was just along for the ride. It's not a favorite. It's not something that I think is the best thing I've ever read, but I enjoyed it for the silliness that it was. And that's about that. After that, we have The Wolf and the Woodsman. This one, I think is a little better than, my feelings are a little bit higher than just it was fine. I actually did like The Wolf and the Woodsman, but nobody else likes it, it feels like. It has a 3.55, which is pretty low. When I did the other video like this, I talked about how certain average ratings are going to change depending on if it's a first in a series or the genre, the age range. It does affect the average rating, and adult fantasy in particular tends to actually lean higher. People seem to be pretty critical of young adult, and certain other genres like literary fiction I talked about in a video I did recently where I mentioned the book White Noise. Literary fiction tends to get some pretty harsh ratings as well, but adult fantasy readers, it would seem to be, from what I have noticed anyway, we're a little bit more generous, it would seem, collectively as a group. And The Wolf and the Woodsman to have a 3.55 is, that's pretty low. That's pretty low for a adult fantasy story. This one is very folklore inspired. It is inspired by, real, like some people's actual heritage is kind of poured into that story, mixed with magic, and it has a little bit of a similar feeling to something like Naomi Novik's Uprooted and Spinning Silver. Ironically, I didn't like Uprooted, but I loved Spinning Silver. The Wolf and the Woodsman for me kind of fits between those, where I didn't like Uprooted, I loved Spinning Silver. The Wolf and the Woodsman is kind of over here when it comes to the style and the way in which the folklore is implemented into the story. So I enjoyed it. It is a little odd because it sort of meanders and the plot's a little bit all over the place. I think for a lot of people, the romantic part of the story, which it's not a fantasy romance, but the romance that is present in the story, I think a lot of people really didn't care for. And the plot is all over the place. I don't know if the reason I was fine with it is because because I'm not a super plot-driven reader. Maybe that's part of it, but I'm not sure. I found the writing to be kind of enchanting, and I really thought it was somewhat abstract in certain areas and creepy. I think that something like The Bear and the Nightingale also has very frightening folklore implemented in the story, and this felt similar in some ways to that. I think another aspect, though, is all the things I'm talking about and I'm comparing it to, I believe the marketing compared it to those things as well. And I think that's a tricky situation because you want people to read it. But at the same time, if you're going to compare it to books that are very well loved, people are going to go in with really high expectations. And they're naturally going to compare it to those things like Spinning Silver and The Bear and the Nightingale. And many people are going to be like, it's not as good as these. And then that kind of, I think, almost instinctively makes them want to see it. It's like they're angry that it wasn't as good. But I can relate to that because there have been times where I've had something compared to something else and then I pick it up and I'm like, no, not even a little bit. That thing over there is way better. So maybe that's part of it, but I also don't want to act as though that's all of it. People have very legitimate reasons why this doesn't work for them, but it worked just fine for me. After that, we have Electra by Jennifer Saint. So this is a mythology retelling, and I know I probably don't have to spend much time on this one. Its average rating, by the way, is 3.72. I'm not that picky when it comes to retellings of mythology, especially Greek mythology. I say especially because I think some people are they have a very strong interest in Greek mythology or a lot of knowledge on Greek mythology. And when they see a retelling, there's certain expectations that they have. There's certain themes they want to see executed. There's certain characters they want to stay true to how they are in the mythology. They don't want you to change it too much. They don't mind you doing something with it and examining different characters, but there's a certain amount of criteria that they need to have met for them to respect it and to think that you're actually doing something that is worth doing. And I'm more of just like, all right, it's a Greek mythology retelling. Do I like the story? Do I like the themes? Do I like the uniqueness of this? Do I like the writing style? I'm more looking at it as just a book. And as I treat retellings as like, this is a retelling. So I expect it to change all sorts of things. And I understand. I've seen some people's arguments, or I've even had conversations with people about their thoughts on retellings, and I think all of it makes complete sense. It's completely legitimate, and there's exceptions to even my more lax view of retelling. Certain times I'm like, why would you, don't call it a retelling of that, then it's there are times where I am that same way, but I'd say for the most part I'm a lot less harsh when it comes to retellings. And as a result of just looking at it as, this is this story and these are these characters, I liked it. I didn't I didn't love it. It's not my favorite mythology retelling. I really liked, though, the way that I think one of the central themes is how much a person can be shaped by their environment and their culture, and how also another theme is how strongly a person can feel when they lose something that is the most important thing to them, how it can be all-consuming, and how they can forget about everything else in their life. They can forget about their responsibilities, their obligations, their children. They can forget about all sorts of other things when they start to focus in on revenge. And revenge plot lines I actually can be rather picky with because they are done so often. But I thought that the way it was done in Electra was quite good. Next up, we have the only one on this list that is not fantasy. But I wanted to include it because I definitely had bias when I went into this book. And I've said, I think almost every single time I bring this book up, that I went into it with bias. And that would be the Maidens. So the setup for this one is that we have this woman who somebody she knows is going to this university, and there was a murder. And so the main character is concerned for the person and their safety. And so she starts kind of looking into this murder that's occurred. And she's had a lot of things happen in her personal life that this is almost like a distraction for her. She almost wants to solve this murder mystery, even though she's not qualified whatsoever. She should not be, it's not appropriate at all for her to be getting involved, but she's getting involved anyway. And I buddy read this with my mom. And my mom she reads when she can, but it's rare that she has the time to read. And also, it's rare that we're going to read the same thing. And so we buddy read this together, and it was so fun to read this and be like, I think it's this, and to theorize and try to predict what was going to happen and chat through it. And it was just really fun because I love my mom and I love buddy reading. And so smushing those two things together led to a fun experience with my mom. The average rating for this is 3.63. I've seen some of the criticisms and I'm like, yeah, I don't disagree necessarily, but I just had such a fun time with it as a result of the experience I had that it led to me liking this a little bit more than I maybe would have had I not had that positive association with it. And I'm also very curious, what are some times that you know that is something that's occurred with something you've picked up? What's a book that happened with, or what's a great buddy reading experience that you've had that led you to maybe have those more positive associations with something? I'd be very curious to know. But the last one for today is the one with the highest average rating. But to repeat myself and reiterate what I was saying at the beginning of the video, the circles that I tend to see and fall into make fun of this constantly, and that would be A Court of Thorns and Roses. So the average rating for this is 4.2, even though I think it has like about 1.5 million average, or I always do that. I always go to say that it has that many average ratings. That doesn't make any sense. It has that many ratings, and the average rating is 4.2. Anyway, I thought ACOTAR was fine. I think that the writing itself is not atrocious. I don't think that the pacing and the storytelling is the worst thing I've ever read. I think it's one of those stories where, for me, it wasn't anything particularly exceptional. It was, kind of a little bit of a Beauty and the Beast retelling, mixed with some fae, sprinkled in, more than sprinkled in. It's Beauty and the Beast is sprinkled in, but the fae is more of the focus. But it's a little bit more new adult, when new adult really wasn't much of a thing or wasn't really on the map as much. And it also, I think, is very accessible, easier to get into, but it's not, for me, exceptional. And I think that for a lot of people that are not in love with this book, that for them it is not exceptional, but it confuses them as to why it gets treated like it's the greatest of all time. Why it's always, if you look at Amazon bestsellers, it's always this series. Something by Sarah J. Maas is always at the top. And I think naturally people go in and they're like, well, this better be amazing. And then they start it and they're like, what is this? And the ending is corny and cheesy. It's like a riddle, and the answer to the riddle is really obvious, but nobody's ever been able to figure it out. And it has some kind of forced stakes and not a whole lot of a plot. There's a lot of the characters just sitting around, eating and talking, and that's about it. So it has other things going on, but when you see the incredible hype around this, you maybe expect it to be a really solid, amazing, exceptional story. And I think for a lot of people it's not. And then there are people that just legitimately are like, I actually think this is horrible and bad. And that's fair if that's your opinions. I didn't think it was horrible and bad. I just thought it was fine. You know, it's fine. It doesn't bug me. I don't think it's the worst thing ever, the way some people do. I have read other things that I think are more, I don't want to say deserving, because that's such a mean way to put it, but there are other things that it would make more sense to me from a analyzing it standpoint if people were really, really harsh on. But I think because this is so popular that there's just that, it has the hype, it pulls people in, they pick it up, and they're like, what's going on? Why does everybody love this? I think a lot of us have had experiences like that. So anyway, that's a list of some books that it feels like everyone that I know, that I chat with, and also based off of average ratings on Goodreads, it seems like a lot of people don't really like these, and I didn't hate them. I thought they were fine. So I would love to know, what are some of your somewhat unpopular opinions? If you're interested in seeing part 1, I'll have that linked, and then after this I'll do true unpopular opinions. I'll do the unpopular opinions tag, and we'll get into some of my less shared thoughts. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.